Hello, I'm John Coleman from ApocatastasisInstitute, an institute for the humanities, an alternative college and high school here on New Milford, Connecticut, USA. The broadcast we have here with Professor Adam Myers is Building a Future, and this is part of our Naturism, Philosophy, and Life series that we've lately started up. Don't worry, all you math freaks and you mathematical wizards. We will be back on the Euclid wagon tomorrow, or rather next week for the remainder of May, and then we'll continue alternating with our naturist and extraordinary presentations. Lately, Adam
This is
here.
tomorrow.
Tomorrow. It's been a long day for both of us and for a lot of people watching. So, but yeah, lately Adam has presented, besides our first installment of Naturism, Philosophy, and Life, on Hegel and on the philosophy of Hegel and how he sees it plugging in to events even now. We covered history since the 19th century, so you can check that out on our regular video sites. Before we get into today's discussion, Adam, what have you been up to lately? Anything new in terms of just chit chat here?
Um, let's see. I've been mostly spending what little time I have studying for my exams that I have to do, as mentioned. Uh, Currently doing a lot of Conan. That's pretty much about it. What little time I have left there, and then I have a small amount of time that I use to do some role playing with some people on one of the servers I know.
Okay, very cool, very cool. And was that a robotic vacuum, or what was that sci-fi sound that we heard lately on your end just now?
I'm not sure. It could be the fans on my computer. My computer fans
Oh,
are.
okay, that's right. That has come up before. So, okay, everyone will be duly aware and very good. And I have a dehumidifier here in humid Connecticut, so we're equally guilty for audio interference here, but we're going to keep
Yeah.
soldiering on.
I do
So
apologize. Once I get a better.
no. Um, All right. So on our screen share here, we're going to queue up our article. So in our first episode, and people can find that in the different playlists and indeed on the proper website of this sub-series of Apocatastases, we cover just the basics of naturism, nudism, and certain aspects. And I think you can tell the direction that Professor Myers and I are coming from. We have different ways of looking at the world, as we all do. But I think, and Adam can correct me here, but I certainly for myself am quite dissatisfied with the nudist community and the what I would consider very
Mhm.
lowbrow presentation of naturism that seems to predominate.
Mhm. I mean that's pretty close to my opinion. Although my opinion is more the ossification of activism. That's more of my sticking point.
Can you elaborate on that? Because I know the topic of activism will be one of your critiques on this particular article, Adam.
Yeah, I mean, again, I appreciate the role that activism can play in the nudist community, but I think it gets overemphasized rather than the focus on creating culture. Because as much as people might not want to hear it, politics is downstream from culture. And unless you have a cultural presence, there's really no point to getting politically involved. It's not going to do anything because people don't know what you're talking about. You first have to be culturally relevant. And I don't think the nudist community takes that to heart.
Great.
And for
Well
me, the
said there. And
article
of
is
course,
sorry.
oh, sorry, Adam.
And for me, the article is sort of just a continuation of that thought.
Good. So we'll nibble at that, and then we'll explore that point. And certainly, Adam's pressing on a very maybe the most profound nerve that we focus on here at the institute, which is culture. And I would even, not to gainsay Adam at all, but I would even go so far as to say, even before it's necessary to be culturally relevant, it's necessary to have a culture.
Mhm.
Um, and that's something I don't really see, at least here in North America, nudists even conscious of, let alone building towards.
Mhm. Yeah.
All right, so here we have, it should be on the screen share here, a nice little illustration. All right, so the article here is Protecting the Right to Be Nude, subtitled by Rana E. Crozy. Why social nudists deserve legal recognition and safeguards against discrimination. And I was interested as I was reviewing this a couple of times, this article, more of a, it's not really an article proper, it's more of a blog post. But they say that Dr. Crozy, a retired nursing professor and 30 years a nudist, is a devoted Solaire member and former AANR trustee and PR chair. She passionately promotes healthy, body positive naturism through numerous media appearances and writings. But what stuck out for me here in Connecticut is she is a devoted Solaire member. And that's I think it's the last remaining naturist club in Connecticut, and one that I haven't darkened the doors of in a long time. So my ears did perk up when I heard this earlier this afternoon. Solaire. And I don't think in Kansas, Adam, that you have any clubs. Is that correct?
I actually am part of one of the few clubs out here.
Oh,
Heartland
okay.
Naturists. They do have a club out here.
Are they a club, or are they kind of pitching themselves like Solaire as a fancy resort?
It's more of a non-landed club.
Oh, okay, very good, very good. Yeah, a lot of the landed clubs around here, from Vermont, New York, Connecticut, New Jersey, have shuttered, especially since COVID-19. So
Hmm.
you see a lot of these non-land. I guess LCN here at Apocatastasis is an example. You see a lot of these non-landed groups forming in the stead of
Hmm.
that. The problem is, this is for another discussion. We'll jump into the article here, but the problem is generationally, people aren't joining groups. It doesn't matter if it's whatever the topic. It could be bowling, it could be knitting, it could be nudism, it could be water skiing, whatever you want. Generationally, the problem a lot of clubs are having, a lot of clubs, is that nobody's joining anything. Do you find that same hesitancy in the circles out in Kansas?
I mean, yeah, and that's also why I'm so critical of a lot of the nudist orgs and their messaging and how they're trying to approach people and what their general strategy is. I mean, their general strategy is how do we get people who are already the kind of person who would like to go to a club? How do we convince them to go to our club? And that's a
Mm-hmm.
very poor strategy. I mean, that's like trying to sell. It's like trying to build a business off of selling, rocket ships to people. Like, but only to middle class customers. Now, what kind of middle class
Mm-hmm.
customers in the market for a rocket ship? Let's put a lot of thinking into this rather than being like, hey, maybe you shouldn't be trying to market rocket ships. Maybe something that's in the realm of reality.
Mm-hmm. Yes, well said there. Well said. All right, so let's dive in here, and then we'll make the critique. So again, Dr. Krause, excuse me, Krozy, Rana Krause. She says, in contemporary society, freedom of expression extends beyond verbal communication to include nonverbal and symbolic acts. For social nudists and naturists, this expression includes choosing to be clothes free in non-sexual mixed gender environments such as nudist gatherings, beaches, or events. They view the human body as inherently natural and believe in fostering a sense of community, personal comfort, and connection with nature through ethical naturism. That's a new adjective you hear lately, ethical naturism. I don't recall hearing that in the past decade.
Yeah, I can see why it's picking off. I personally don't think that it's going to fly very well in today. I mean, it makes sense for certain communities. So if you're targeting a particular demographic, that might be something that might give us some hay there. But for the body politic as a whole, not many people are going to care.
Mm. I'm trying to think. There is another group, and I cannot think what it is, that uses the adjective ethical beforehand. I'll see if the brain can click into gear.
Is it
But not
veganism?
ethical veganism. That's what I was thinking, but I always thought kind of the vegans pitch themselves as being ethical in say. Ethical. Yeah, I don't know. It'll come to me probably 5 minutes after we stop recording, but we'll see.
Yeah.
All
I
right.
mean,
So
I mean,
yes.
oh, I was going to say honestly that's my main criticism. I mean, compare that language with
Mm-hmm.
the vegan movement. I
Go on.
mean, how successful is the vegan movement? Not very. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, it's got some pull, but culturally, vegans have a very poor reputation for their activism, largely as a result of
Mm.
their activism. You know, just simply having vegan culture without
Mm.
connected to politics, without connected to activism, like Burger King's Impossible Burger, for example. That's done far more benefit
Mm.
to veganism than anything a vegan activist has done.
Mm. That's interesting. So when I have no real knowledge of veganism except as a third party, like most people watching this are
Mm-hmm.
third parties to nudism or third parties to higher education for that matter.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we're all a part of different so-called communities, but yeah, you're right. I mean, what would be my impression is that the vegans make a very good point. An excellent. I mean, I have no quibbles about their observations about eating meat. Someone who ate meat before we recorded here, myself. And yet, having eaten meat that was factory farmed, I also I agree with their observations. At the same time, I get the impression in real life, and then just from social observations, that there is an evangelical or a preachy aspect to veganism, or a judgy, if you like, aspect to veganism that has not encouraged me to necessarily pursue what I think is a moral a space moral amoral position that they take. And I think I think there is a parallel here. I'd like your thoughts on it with nudism. I think a lot of people have no real hangups with nudism, but it's some of the other baggage, whether it's thought through or not, it's some of the other baggage that comes with the title or naturist or whatever, or just the general verbing reality of being naked and the things that society, to our last episode, has larded onto that.
Yeah, and that's more or less my position. I
Mm,
mean, when you approach nudism and naturism as like the sort of ethical thing, I mean, I think it is ethical. I genuinely think that it would be better if we ate less meat. I think it would be better if we were more socially moved. The issue again is that focus on the activists, because the activists tend to take it one step too far.
mm,
It's not enough for us to uh, reduce the amount of meat we make. Maybe use some meatless products every so often. Maybe I get my Impossible Burger from Burger King, but I get bacon on it.
mm,
Small little things like that. It's mostly not meat. There's some meat on there, but it's
mm,
mostly not meat. It's a compromise.
mhm,
If you just had that kind of perspective in regards to nudism, things would work out really well. Like it would catch on because I can order an Impossible Burger with bacon on it. The
mm,
employee might be a bit confused, but that's really not their problem. They're going to just make the burger as I want it.
mhm,
If nudism had this sort of approach of, look, we don't really care about your politics. We're not really trying to necessarily save the environment. That is a
mhm,
nice side benefit, kind of like with veganism. It's a nice side benefit to veganism that
mhm,
when you reduce meat, you reduce CO2 emissions. With nudism, we could say the same thing with textiles. Be like, hey, look, we're reducing our textile input, the output of CO2 from textiles, from their production.
mhm,
But a better way would be simply say, look, do you really want the government controlling what you're allowed to wear or what you're required to wear?
mm,
Is this where you want to go? Do you want other people to push their clothing standards on you, their
mm,
modesty standards on you? Focusing on more that autonomy angle and folks, again, developing that culture, developing that, hey, look, here's where you can do nudism. Let's do a nudism book club or something like
mm,
that. Just
mhm.
really small, simple scale events. That's going to be the main source of push into the culture.
Now, to push back against that, I do agree, in fact, with your thesis. But just to play devil's advocate, there is a dissimilarity between vegans, who've been our example, I suppose, in the show, and naturists in terms of activism. Meaning, on 2 points I see. One of which is that naturists, when they have to, belly up to body positivity, which is a separate so-called movement. I don't even like using these terms for various reasons, but anyway, we're stuck with them. Or yes, environmentalism or LGBT rights and activism, and various other flavors of the day. It would seem to me almost like a I don't know, a bridge building. Like the nudists historically have had to, because they are marginalized largely, in my opinion, because of their own failure to present social naturism to normal people in a. They have found themselves marginalized, and so they've had to, connect to other marginalized groups. It would seem, on the first point here, I'll just, before I introduce the second one, your thoughts on it, that these different alliances to other so-called communities are more alliances of convenience, in order just to have, kind of building up a coalition, I suppose, against of other outside groups. Would you agree with that, or?
And I think that's what the article is trying to argue here.
Mm,
The thing is that my pushback against that is, well, that can be effective in some markets, in some places, right?
mm,
Like, you're gonna kind of need some kind of activism if you want to have 80 nudist presence in Saudi Arabia, right? Like, you're not really gonna be able to get a lot of culture there.
mm,
But when it comes to like the United States, where we have sort of we're sort of in between states, where there's some areas of the country that'd be really against it, some areas that'd be really
mm,
for it. Activism in coalition building just isn't as important as the naturist movement wishes to imagine itself to
mm-hmm,
be. Because again, we don't really need a coalition. It's not
mm,
really necessary to build some sort of body politic. Coalition really makes sense when you're trying to do something political. But
mm-hmm,
we don't have anything worth getting political. We just don't. We don't have the cultural presence to make any capital worth it.
mm-hmm,
It's not that we don't have a cool idea that needs more people to hear it. We do. The
mm,
issue is that we have no backing for it.
mm-hmm,
What are we bringing to the LGBTQ? What are we bringing to other minority movements that they can use to advance their causes? Because that's what they're going to look at it as. It's going to be
mm,
simple. If we're going to try to rely on them as a means of convenience, they're going to try to rely on nudism as a
mm-hmm,
means of convenience. And by far and large, they don't give a toss about nudism. They just don't. Nudism
mm-hmm,
doesn't really have anything to offer except shock value, which advances their own activist causes. Like, they're not when you do World Naked Bike Ride, that's not about nudism. That's about climate change. And
mm-hmm,
the activists will be very clear about that. Their purpose of getting naked is to attract attention for their cause, not to normalize nudity itself. In fact, normalizing nudity is actually counterproductive to their aims.
mm,
So, before we try to build this coalition, again, we need to focus on culture. We need to develop media that's nudist. We need to create animations, comics, that sort of thing. If
mm-hmm,
video games is a big one, right? And to bring to your point about clubs, where are all the people at right now? They're currently playing video games. Right now, they're currently watching Netflix. Where are the nudists not at? They're not on video games. They're not on Netflix.
mm,
Again, to me, I'm more baffled that the community itself is confused why we don't have more young people when the answer is like right there. It's like, where are the young people at? Oh, they're right over there. You just gotta walk over there,
mm,
talk to them. They'll be right there. They're really excited about the idea. You have to walk over there and bring it to them.
mm.
But the community's like, no. Let's continue to advertise in AARP. That's what we're gonna do. We're gonna advertise in the magazine AARP, and then we're gonna be really confused. Where are all the young people at?
Mm. That's a good point there. That's a good point. I'm trying to find on the article here where it does advocate visual media and video games and all this stuff, but it's here. And here we go. Yeah. Positive representation in film, television, and social media can play a powerful role in dismantling harmful stereotypes, aligning naturism with broader societal ideals such as sustainability and individual liberty. And it could help shift perceptions in a meaningful way. So this article, to its credit, does at least tip the hat to that observation.
Yeah, and again, I appreciate that, but I don't think it goes far enough. I think this. I mean, if you look at how much time they spent on this, they spend. It's again, the whole thing's about changing laws. It's not about establishing
Mhm.
culture. It's a bit like trying to put the cart before the horse.
Mhm.
It makes sense if there were a tab on Netflix or YouTube, right, for me to
Mhm.
click on, it says I want nudist content.
Mhm.
I want Post Free Life. I want ANR's latest web comic or whatever it is. Maybe I want to watch Frasier, but for nudists, whatever it might be. Right? I want that kind of content. When there's a tab for that, then we can talk about politics.
Mm.
We have a cultural impact. Then that means that the society has deemed us relevant enough to have a conversation with. I mean,
Well,
you could have the greatest idea in the world, but if you're holding up a picket and you're just shouting to the wind, no one's going to pay attention to you. It doesn't matter how good the idea is. You have to communicate it. And you have to communicate it in the medium that people are actually listening to. And as of now, we're not doing that. Right now, we're a bit like a street preacher, but without any crowd.
Okay.
And so what we need to do is go where the crowd is.
Which is online.
Exactly.
By the way, speaking of building a culture, on our LCN, Litchfield County Naturist site, thanks to everyone's donations, we've lately been able to dub, with the help of AI, a conversation with the French philosopher and author Margot Casson. And you can catch that here. Philosophy in Her Skin is what we've named it, from the title of one of her responses here. So you can freely check that out. But let me just pitch this to you, Adam. When it comes to this idea of activism, so the vegan, he comes to his observation about the brutality of factory farming, and then he realizes very quickly the social implications of that, and he becomes perhaps evangelical in that. And perhaps there's a parallel here with naturists, meaning one of the biggest things that naturists bitch about, in my language, is there are no events going on, and also we can't be naked in a park or in a river or whatever the case may be. And so one immediately bumps into the political in this observation. And so how does one appraise this reality? Meaning, yes, we want to build a culture before we move into activism. We want to prove to the society that we are part of, that we're worth listening to. At the same time, we really cannot grow without addressing actual structural, so-called legal prohibitions on nudity that would demand political activism.
Well, I would look at this to pull from another group, furries. To be
Okay.
honest, I mean,
what is a? Can you? I really have no. I have a very very tertiary understanding. What is a furry? There's a dude in town. He drives around with like some fox hat or something. What? Hey, look at those guys. What is a furry, Adam? I have no idea really what this.
all a furry is somebody who's very interested in anthropomorphic characters. Like that's it. So they enjoy the interacting with it, imagining themselves as one, whatever. They're enthusiastic about anthropomorphic characters. So think Zootopia or Robin Hood from Disney's Robin Hood. Those are some classic examples of where you're going to find a lot of enthusiasm from the furry community. They are largely marginalized in the same vein. And they have people who are also oppressed and discriminated against. To be called a furry at work might get you fired. You know,
Mm,
so I'm not immune to that criticism, to that concern. Because if you're somebody
mm,
who's into the furry fandom, it's really hard to find local events. There's,
mm,
sometimes you don't have access to a nearby fur con. You might not be able to do that.
mm.
So what do you do? What you do is you go online. You find
Uh-huh.
like-minded people who are interested in the same topics you are. And simply by you being a person who's interested in a topic, you'll attract other people who are interested in that topic.
Mm,
Again, I understand, but I want to experience nudism. I want to go out to the park. I want to go near the river, whatever it may be. I'm really
mm,
disappointed that yet another resort has become clothing only or closed down entirely.
mhm. Yeah.
I get you. The problem is that's just the consequences of the community's actions up to this point.
Mm,
By not doing the culture, by not making media and content, by not investing in it financially. Yes, this requires the community, the ones who do have some money, to
mhm,
invest money in the artists who are interested in creating that work.
mm,
By not doing that, you make it impossible for us to get parks to be opened in the first place,
mhm,
right? Most of these resorts were created during a time when nudism had larger culture.
mhm,
There was the nudists at the time exploited a new medium called magazines. They
mm,
exploited TV. They exploited movies. They exploited various other domains that they could find where people could engage in nudism. They took advantage of where the people were located. They were the street preacher, and they went to the crowd. That's
mm,
what we got to do. And until we do that, we're going to keep running into more legal barriers, right?
mm,
What's caused the greatest uptick in the potency of British naturism in the
mm,
UK? Right now, the UK technically it's legal to be naked. In the UK, where did that come from? It came from the growth in popularity with nudism. Where did that growth in popularity in nudism come from? COVID,
mhm,
right? It really is that straightforward. Culture precedes politics. You do not
mm,
get to have what you want politically until you have a culture.
mm,
You just don't. Until you as a vegan make delicious food that people just want to eat for the sake of eating it, right?
mm,
Maybe if it has a little bit of meat in it, sprinkled in, why not? But it's mostly vegetable, it's mostly
mhm,
delicious, and you're just offering it as good food. It just so happens to be almost vegan, not quite, almost vegan, or vegan, right? And you're just offering it, and it just happens to be good food. You start a Burger King, if you will, to use that example, right?
mhm,
But it's just for vegan, it's fast food, it just happens to be vegan, but it tastes good, and you're not necessarily telling people it's vegan. In fact, it's near vegan. Some of your dishes do have some bits of meat in it, but you're not really talking too much about it. It's just there's less of it. By simply doing that small change, you'll
mm.
make veganism more common. You'll make it more culturally acceptable, and you'll make it such that people will end up just wanting to be part of it because it's an interesting culture.
Mm,
Then when you start making videos, you make some animations, you do stuff that normalizes this concept,
mm,
people just accept it as normal and they get interested. And once they get interested, once it's normal, once it's something that just people do,
mm.
then they bring their politics with them.
I would say the biggest thing, and it seems like the smallest thing, and yet I think it's the biggest when it comes to building a naturist culture, or maybe even the language itself is problematic. A culture that's more receptive to naturism. Um, I would say the biggest thing to do is to do what the um, the vegans do, and perhaps the furries. Um, and that is to talk about it. That would seem to be where naturists have really, in my opinion, shot themselves in the foot. Is that whether that's out of deference to the mores of the society, or as I might imagine, probably fear, bourgeois fear, um, that naturists have have stagnated, to use an earlier word in this broadcast, have stagnated because of that fear or because of that concern, whatever. And the biggest thing is to simply normalize that, yes, I go camping with my friends naked, or yes, I go bowling, or whatever the case may be, or I'm part of X, Y, and Z club. That without getting into the type of formal politics that we've perhaps been critiquing in this broadcast, that's that social ease, just like other groups, and just that nudism is just part of one's life, just like they might like a black coffee, like a good psychopath in the morning, or a Dunkin' Donuts. That would, I think, more than anything else, to chuck that false concern for the prevailing society, because that has done naturism no good, except that it has created a culture where naturists are assumed just to be doing sex parties in the woods or in these clubs. And then also to chuck especially that bourgeois fear of what will the other think.
Yeah, yeah. And like I said, that all comes down to culture. And this culture needs to start online. I mean, again, I would be far less confident in my views. I would be far more self-skeptical and more like, maybe I'm wrong. If when I type into Steam, the world's largest and most powerful online video gaming platform, period. Like, when you get a video game, 90% of the time it's on Steam. It's a huge platform.
Oh yeah, I walked into.
It's got competitors.
I walked into. It wasn't Babbage's, but it was a GameStop. It was one of these franchises, like 10 years ago. And innocent me, I hadn't touched a video game in 10 years from there. And the guy at the counter told me, "Yeah, just go on Steam, man. Why are you even here?" And that, of course, that store folded pretty soon after. But yeah. So, exactly.
Yeah. That's a huge platform. Type in nudism for a tag for a search, or nudist, naturism, ANR, INF, clothes free. Type any of the orgs in. Type any of the names associated with nudism. You'll get one hit. Nudist Beach Simulator, where the point of the game is to run away from the nudist trying to strip you.
Well, there you go.
That's it. That's the one. Again, not a single game sponsored by ANR. Not one. Not a game sponsored by INF. It doesn't have to be big. It can be something small. Heck, it could just be a visual novel for like $10,000, $20,000. Slap together a visual novel. Have at least one. Not even one. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, even in maybe the two or 3 years that we've known each other, and this is a topic that we've brought up, the visual novel and whatnot. In the meantime, you've had AI. You wouldn't. I don't even think at this point you would need anywhere close to $10,000 to come up with such a project. If one had recourse even to something like a basic AI image generator. I know a lot of them, the mainstream ones, the free ones have prohibitions on nudity, but there are ways to work around that, let's say, and it would not, I don't think, cost anywhere near $10,000. So shame on some of these national groups for not thinking outside the box.
Yeah, I've been pushing for it. And there's so little interest in getting it done, and it needs financial backing. We need the ANR to sponsor it so that people know it's an investment. We need the brand. The brand for one of the orgs needs to be put on one of these products to make it go viral. But until that happens, there's just no point. Why? Again, my question continues to circle around. Why are you focusing on trying to change the laws you know aren't going to change? You know the culture. You know that people aren't interested at the moment. There's not a strong enough will. I mean, people don't even believe climate change exists. And do you want to convince them about nudism now? 10% of people, 10% of Americans believe Elvis is still alive.
Well, you get me in the right mood. I might join them on a good day. No.
Yeah. It's just like, again, you cannot honestly expect. You can't get mad at not communicating the message when you're not communicating it to the people that are open to it.
Mm,
Gamers are, as a group of people, tend to be one of the most open groups of people imaginable. I know the media tries to pretend it's not the case, but they really are.
mm,
Gamers tend to really respect skill. They tend to respect camaraderie, and they tend to respect challenges, and they
mm,
tend to really enjoy their games. It doesn't take a lot to make a video game that appeals to gamers and you give them something interesting to do. It
mm,
doesn't have to be massively complex. It just has to be a entertaining game loop. You just gotta put up the money, do a fundraiser, set up a Kickstarter, whatever you need to do. Communicate with all the major resorts and all the major federations. Have them all
mm,
chip in. Have each federation that's part of the INF chip in $1,000.
mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it's like what, 120 countries? What, 50 countries? Whatever it is. $1,000? That's 50,000. 50 countries, $50,000.
Mm.
Make a simple game where naturism is normalized. You know, make a gaming company.
Yeah, and towards the visual novel, I will say, to this particular blog from Substack, and there's a lot of great stuff happening on Substack in the past couple of years. This is called Planet Nude, and they do have some cartoons, and I suspect they have
Yeah,
AI helping them do that, but they're able to pump this stuff out.
yeah, and that's an example. Like Planet Nude is doing the right thing, and as much as I might criticize the article itself, the fact the article exists
Mm,
is a step in the right direction. This is what we need more of. Now, I still think that this is still not enough.
mhm,
This is a 180-degree direction. So I want to give massive props to the community for putting this together, and the gentleman who started Planet Nude. I want to give props to them because they have actually done something that takes a large amount of work to get off the ground. But
mhm.
this is what we need. This is what the community needs. We need more of this.
And I,
Lots
I would
more.
I would I would build off of that same sentiment to say also to Substack. I mean, Substack in their New Year's message mentioned some zany groups that they are very proud to have on the platform, and they mentioned nudists. Uh, and it is interesting, and I have a fairly good understanding of who hangs out on our websites. There's a lot of conspiracy people that when I say our website, I mean with the Institute. And I of course do the show with Dr. Fetzer and all that. Well, those of you who are keen for conspiracies, you and I need to ask ourselves, why are the same platforms like YouTube and Google, which I believe are very censorious, why are on formerly political topics, why are they just was 10 or 15 years ago? It was easy to access, completely wholesome naturist material on the websites just mentioned, and Bing and whatever. And in the past decade and a half, that has not been the case. And so when you type in naturism, you get a foul website, you get pornography, um, and age verification, and grubbed
You're cutting
altogether.
out.
And people who are so hot for these conspiracies, of which I certainly am one. Okay, do I need to repeat?
Yeah, you fell out there for a bit.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Where should I pick up from?
We left off on Google and YouTube being censorious.
Yeah, so I was just saying in a nutshell that people who can see agendas and attempts to stomp out free speech and to stomp out communities should wonder why these same platforms are just as censorious about naturism. And why is that? And why is the naturist message of wholesome social nudity, and that, as we indicated last episode and in this whole series to come, the deeper benefits of that, why is that being warred against, as I see it, by these same platforms that have other very obvious agendas? And
I mean,
anyway,
I think there's
yeah, go on.
my guess is there's two main sources, to be honest.
Mhm.
One is the porn industry; it pays too well.
Mm,
It pays extremely well. And two, there's the moral panic. Combine the moral panic and the fact the porn industry pays so amazingly well, we don't have a chance.
Mm. So are
And
you?
that's again,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and that's why, I'm trying to explain, what we need is we need organized creativity. We need to create nudist products, and it'd be even better if we could organize to create that.
So are you? I had not thought about this before. Are you suggesting that the formal pornography industry is pressuring these larger websites and social media to eliminate wholesome displays of nudity for their own interests?
I mean, I think that they would be game for it if nudism was enough of a threat.
Mm,
I mean, I don't think I wouldn't put it past them,
mm-hmm,
but I don't think they need to. I mean, nudists are too busy shooting themselves in the foot
mm-hmm,
for the porn industry to care. It's more moral outrage and the simple fact that the pornography industry pays well per click. So when they run an ad, when they go up to Google, they say, "Hey, in the nudist communities, we can do what? Maybe a couple thousand.
mm-hmm.
The porn industry can do a couple million,
Yeah.
and so they get the top of the search results. That's how that works. And YouTube,
Okay, I
YouTube
see
is
what you're
so
saying.
busy being YouTube is so busy being, their content control and their censorship,
Mm.
and trying to appeal to the inner Karen in us all.
Yes.
They're too focused on making sure, above all, that they take the most, the we might consider the political center left position, and make that the culture, because they're
Mm,
doing that because that's where a lot of the Karen energy comes from.
mm,
Is we might consider centrist left wing, center left to left.
mm,
That's where that Karen energy comes from, and that's who they're trying to make safe for. Um, so, I mean, that's ultimately, at the end of the day, that's how this stuff works. A lot of it's based on money, really
mm,
cold money, not malevolent money, stupid money. It's a
mm-hmm,
lot more. The difference between conspiracy theory and reality is the use of Hammond's razor. What
mm.
makes reality more boring? That's usually the truth.
Okay.
And it's usually a result of companies just being so just mind-bendingly incompetent.
Mm,
I mean, YouTube could make a fortune propping up, nudism, because it's an untapped market.
mm-hmm.
But the porn
Yeah.
industries, that's the stranglehold, and YouTube is too lazy as an
Mm,
organization to actually do the content filtering required to separate porn from nudism,
mm,
and they just don't care. They don't care enough to go through their algorithm and actually do the corrections. Because again, nudism doesn't have a presence. We don't have a bite.
mm-hmm,
I mean, if YouTube's CEO were to say, "We think nudists are all stupid and icky,"
mm,
but how's that going to affect his bottom line? It's not.
mm-hmm.
And that's my point. We have to make it worth their while. We have to be where the CEO of YouTube goes, "I can't say that about the nudist community. They're too large."
Mm-hmm.
That's when you can start pushing. That's when you get their attention. This is not just like, when I say politics, I don't just mean with Washington. I mean corporations too,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
right? How do you make Facebook not ban nudism? You have to be big enough to where they miss you,
Mm,
and to be big enough, you have to have a cultural impact. You
mm-hmm.
have to have that culture. You can't do the politics without the culture. You can't get the acceptance until you have the culture.
Mm,
Until you got the magazines, until you got the video games, until you got the web comics, until you get the stories, the novels,
mm,
until you get that, and you produce culture, get normal people, not nudists, normal people are interested in. That just happens to have a nudist message behind the scenes. That
mm,
just happens to be entertaining to read. Until you do that, you cannot get or acceptance on Facebook, on YouTube, on Google.
mm,
You can't push back against the porn industry. You're not going to be able to do any of that until you have enough people who are interested in the movement to make it worth anyone's while to listen to.
mm.
You can ring up your congressman, but what's the difference between you and Crazy Steve who gets his commands from the toaster?
Mm.
When Crazy Steve has more followers at the moment, he's got 10 followers on Twitch or something. How many followers you got?
And a toaster.
Until we have a bigger impact than Crazy Steve, YouTube's going to hear us and go, that's nice, Crazy Steve too, with the whole nudity thing. That's really nice. Unfortunately, we don't like porn. Click.
Mm-hmm.
And that's if you get a chance to call them. They normally don't even give you that.
Mm.
But when you're big enough, when you get a silver play button, YouTube has a support line for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
When you get that silver play button, YouTube will listen to your complaints because now you're worth it. You start getting powerful enough, you start getting enough attention, like Markiplier or PewDiePie or whatever. When you say you're going to pull out, possibly, if you don't start respecting your content, okay, now people are going to start turning their heads. Oh, okay, yeah, wow, that's a thing. I didn't know that was a thing. Yeah, I didn't know about that. Did you hear about? Have you ever tried it? That's the conversation you get. As of now, Crazy Steve and his weird Adam's family that bathe out in the woods nude, they're just kind of crazy people. They're kind of hicks and they're just kind of weird. Or they're radical left hippies. And that's another fun one. That's all they really are. And they're easy to ignore. When 20% of people are nudists, they enjoy the culture. There's a tab on Netflix for it. There's a whole bunch of YouTube channels that are dedicated to nudism. Dedicated to talking about and having the conversation. There's the new movie that's coming out that happens to be clothing free on the cinema. Okay, that's harder to ignore. And that creates that following, that creates that conversation, that creates that energy and that momentum. That is what allows you to start getting into politics. First, you have to organize culture. Before you start organizing for a political rally, organize to make a TV show.
Yes, I recall, I think it was a Catholic author. Either I interviewed them or they quoted someone else, but and we can apply this now to all sorts of groups, including to our topic here. But this individual said, before it's good religious art, in this case literature, it needs to be good art. And the same with naturism, that one wishes to have a broad appeal of the deeper meanings and simply being naked. And this brings me to my final point, as we're getting a bit long in the tooth here with the hour of the night. Thank you very much for your time, Adam. But this is almost the catch-22 of where naturists are. So almost all naturists I've come across have zero consciousness of there being a naturist movement to begin with. To your point of having to build culture, even culture so basic as there being a naturist community. Unfortunately, the naturist community, so-called, has presented itself as a vacation preference and nothing more, which explains, again, the shooting in the foot that we've so referenced this past hour. But there is this catch-22 where people who are more organizationally minded and trying to build that culture run up against Joe Blow normie, Joe Blow textile, if we will, who finds social nudity weird. For most people who are watching this right now, nudism is weird. And the catch-22 is wanting to ally with these other groups, whether that's bike rides or solstice hikes, for instance, here on the screen, or yoga or whatever, wanting to ally with these groups in order to make naturism this, it's not simply about being naked. And the catch-22 is that energy and the opposite energy of not wanting to get sucked into being an attention grabber for other communities, as you've referenced yourself. I don't know if you have any concluding thoughts on that dynamic and that tension, perhaps.
I mean, yeah, but I completely agree. The issue is ultimately it has to come from the orgs that already exist right now. The orgs that exist right now need to do the change because they're the ones that can make the culture happen. They're the ones that can organize, that can inform people that there's a movement. They have to be the ones to lead it. They have to be the ones to make it start happening. And they're the ones that aren't doing it. And that ultimately, that's my main critique. Because British Naturism is doing a lot better than it used to. It still needs to do some improvement, but it's doing way better. It's 180 degrees from what they were doing before COVID. ANR and INF, that's what they need to start doing. ANR needs to go, wait a minute. ANR, we're putting out the newsletter. Hey, we just opened a Kickstarter. You know, we're going to raise $1 million to make a survival game. You know, it's going to be surviving in the woods or something really simple. It's a saturated market, so they should not be expecting to make a lot of money from this, or even make back their money. This is, in their mind, should be a marketing expense. So they're putting this together. They say, okay, look, this is a game. It just so happens to be naturist themed. It just so happens to be that nudity is normalized and it's the default. Rust does this, but they have a political message with theirs. So you do the same kind of thing like Rust does, except it's sponsored by the AANR, about camping, about hanging out in the woods or whatever, you know, something a bit more chill and relaxing. There's a market potentially for that. And they could exploit it. Or maybe a mystery, an adventure game. There's a lot of options. You can do a lot with $1 million in a video game. It doesn't take a lot of money to make a decent video game. Indie games make this very clear. We're not looking for AAA. Not what we're looking for. Much cheaper, much more bare bones, more focused on game loops and flashy graphics. I promise you. One game like that, all the ANR has to do is do that, and then ask the community to pitch in. Sponsor the game, put the Kickstarter up, ask people for their art submissions. You get it flowing in. You get people who you didn't know existed coming out of the woodwork to contribute.
Yeah, you will find. I found this with the school. You know, the people you wouldn't think would be your supporters are, you know, they are the ones, and the ones you would think would support you are useless. So that's true for other communities as well. By the way, for the audience, so you might recognize the lady here. This is Andy Rogers, who's been on the show, the interview show, a couple of times. We'll have to get her back on this summer, perhaps. But she does a lot of work with, speaking about making outreach and culture, a lot of work with women in naturism. So fancy seeing her here. Good. Well, I think we covered a lot here, Adam, in this Substack post, and made a good, respectful critique of elements of activism when it comes to naturism. You had mentioned that your politics is downstream of culture. Is that Curtis Yarvin who came up with that, or is that someone else?
I don't remember who exactly said it, but I do think it's true. It might be Steve Bannon, potentially. I don't remember off the top of my head.
Oh, okay.
I just think it's
sure.
The fact is that politics is in fact downstream from culture. If you don't have a cultural presence, there's no way you're going to have a political presence. You just don't get to have one.
Yeah, and I would just to rephrase that here, and we look at our website here of Apocatastasis in general. That's very much outside of naturism. That's very much why we get involved in different things, whether that is public outreaches academically, or with liturgy, or with publishing, or with different shows we have on current events. All of that is trying to build in a larger sense this culture. A lot of people, they jump to religion, or they jump to economics, or they jump to politics, or indeed they jump to some niche activism, and they've forgotten culture. And Adam and I are very much on the same page when it comes to this. If we don't have that soil, you'll never grow, in this simile, you'll never grow these plants. And you'll never, those of us who see all these problems and we have all these great solutions, none of those things will ever take root without a rich culture. And so when it comes to, for instance, Litchfield County naturists, which I get a fair amount of questions and a fair amount of flack on as regards to school, in fact, not just part of, I would say the major reason we continue to have this group associated with the college is that observation. If we can't get our bodies right, if we can't get our shame excised, false shame excised, and all the physical trauma that comes with child rearing and later life in this culture, other problems will not be solved. And so that explains, LCN explains a lot of things, but I very much appreciate Adam's observation this episode about culture, because that's what I think a lot of us are missing. And besides Adam's point, as we knock off here, I certainly appreciate Adam's time. So thank you very much for that. I'm trying to get out of the screen share, and it's just not cooperating. Okay, we should be full screen here. How's it looking, Adam?
Not quite yet. Give it a second.
Not quite yet. Yeah, wait a second here.
There it goes.
Okay, there we go. Okay. Anyway, thank you to the audience who watched this, and indeed, Adam, thank you for your observations this past hour as we made our critique of the Substack article.
My pleasure.
Okay. And we'll catch everyone next week as we finally have taken over the screen. We'll catch everyone next week for our regular Euclid series. I believe we're on Proposition 16.
I think so. Well, I'll double check.
Okay. Yeah, we'll get our ducks in a row. But anyway, Adam, thank you for your time, and audience, thank you for your attention.
Have a wonderful